Hello, everybody. My name is Joel Filderman, and welcome to the Dog Trainers Connection. I'm not a dog trainer. People you see around me are. And together, they have over 150 years of knowledge and experience in the dog training world. And we get together to discuss a topic about dog training. Today's topic is shelters. Are they helping or are they hurting dogs? And when I was researching this topic, I found out that according to the ASPCA, there's something like 6 million plus dogs that are in shelters in this country. And according to some other things, there are 25 million dogs worldwide who are in shelters, dog shelters, I guess, worldwide. And I found some interesting things about whether what we're doing in this country is helping the dogs, particularly certain dogs that are black, as we've discussed in other videos, that most dogs that are black in color, when people come into the shelter, they're not adopted. And I found an absolutely horrible article that someone described what it's like for a dog in a shelter and what happens in a kill shelter that I would rather not get into. But on the other hand, I also found that in other countries, for example, in Germany, they have built for all intents and purposes, a luxury shelter that can hold, I believe, up to 1,500 dogs, where you go into it and it's not this cramped feeling. And they have, according to one article, a 90% success rate. Also in Costa Rica, they're trying to get dogs adopted by giving them specific breeds. They're combining breeds, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of different ways to think about this. But so what I'm asking today is, do shelters help dogs or do shelters hurt dogs? And Brian, why don't you start us out today?
Okay, thanks. Well, I do come from a shelter background. In the 1990s, I worked at the Animal Rescue League of Boston. It's a downtown centrally located shelter in Boston, probably for 3 years in the mid-90s. And unfortunately, it wasn't a no-kill shelter. And due to the fact of where it was located, and while they didn't have, they had pretty much unlimited resources, the dogs, you could certainly see over time, the longer the dogs stay in the shelter without proper enrichment and socialization and exercise, that it was much to their demise. They didn't fare well. They didn't get better in shelters in that environment. But that was back in the 90s. And luckily, there's been a lot understood between now and then. And there's a great program that is being introduced in a lot of shelters around the US. It's called Dogs Playing for Life. I don't know if anybody's heard of it. It's run by Amy Sadler and Trish Lord and a few other people. And it's basically going around to shelters that have some resources and helping them learn how to get these dogs out of the cages and out of the runs and into social play groups. So they spend a lot of time teaching the shelter attendants how to recognize body language and energy and to utilize tools and resources to safely allow dogs to interact with each other. And what they're finding, obviously, is that these dogs are increasing their self-confidence, their social confidence, their behavior when they're greeting with other people and other dogs, which is obviously making them far more adoptable. So I think, to answer your question, David, to answer it, Joel, a little more direct, I think it really depends on the shelter. At some shelters, you can take a dog in that is probably not going to do well in most families, and if it's in the right shelter, getting the right enrichment on a regular basis, they can turn an unadoptable dog into an adoptable dog. However, in the same token, if you go in the wrong shelter, I think you can take a fully adoptable dog and turn it into an unadoptable dog. So It really comes down to the shelter and their resources and probably what their mission statement is and what they're in it for.
And Joyce, what do you think? Are they helping or are they hurting?
That's an open-ended question there. That's I'm in Georgia, down here in the South, and so we have it a little rougher down here, I think, than in the big cities where the ASPCA is, and all the larger funded organizations. So I'm surrounded by shelters that are closed, and what that means is they don't do adoptions at all. So the dogs go in and they never come out. They don't do anything at all to help the dogs. Many of them don't have air conditioning. Many of them don't have indoor space. Dogs are crammed in outdoor runs, just run by either the local police department or the fire department. Dogs are just rounded up and that's where they go. So it really is a hard question to answer definitively with one general answer. I think that there's an effort to make it better. And I too come from a shelter background. Fortunately, my situation was a small city where it wasn't mass euthanasia. It was only as needed. But still there was euthanasia. But here it's a different story. And what I see is same thing Brian said, good dogs go in and they don't come out good. And bad dogs go in and sometimes are kept in that environment for months and months and months and months. And a lot of times a well-meaning rescue pulls them and then they have a bad dog they've got to try to deal with. So it's not an answer you can put yes or no to. It just depends on the area, depends on the shelter, depends on if there's the governing body behind them, the finances, all of that. But I do definitely appreciate the movement that's going on. I know Jacksonville, Florida has a wonderful shelter now where their euthanasia rate has dropped to almost zero due to programs such as trap, neuter, release for cats and the programs they have out in the public to make awareness for spay and neuter. Because truly the solution to all of this is spay and neuter. Shelters are doing the best they can, but until everybody breeding stops and spay and neuter becomes the law of the land, we're going to continue to have a pet overpopulation problem.
Jeff, what about you?
Did you say Jeff?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, I agree with Joyce. It is kind of hard to pinpoint an answer here. I guess I don't want to reiterate anything that was already said, but one thing that keeps popping into my head was, a public shelter versus a private shelter, or I should say a public shelter versus a private rescue, or a 501c3 rescue that is operating a facility. I think our expectations of shelters are way out of whack as far as public shelters are concerned. I'm not saying that I condone the things that they fail to provide to dogs, but a public shelter generally is there to provide food, water, and shelter. And fortunately, more shelters every day are getting really wonderful volunteers that can help, with any kind of training or, like Brian said, enriching the dogs' lives. So I try not to say that they're hurting dogs. Obviously, I think anyone who runs a nonprofit or a shelter knows that they could always be doing more. I think that's, at least, my wife and I, we've been in rescue a long time, and we've had our own 501 for 8 years now. And, we don't overpopulate. We can only handle a certain amount of dogs. And even when we know, I know intellectually I'm providing what they need and more on a given day, I am always challenging myself, can I do more? And I think it's up to the individual institution or facility or leadership to ask that challenging question. Can we do more? I don't like to say that shelters hurt dogs, and the fact is there's some really crappy shelters out there. And they're probably, doing the bare bone minimum. And then there's some great shelters out there that are going above and beyond, and they're going without, and, they're spending time away from their family, and they're spending their own money, and they're doing whatever they can to enrich the lives of the animals in their care. So I think it's it could go either way. I think the root of the problem is, you know, we can get into spay and neuter, we can get into the kill and no kill, but when it comes to shelter population, we're always looking to shelters as the answer. Well, how about you on the couch over there? You're moving in 3 days and you got to get rid of your dog because you couldn't find any place to move with him. Okay. Mm-hmm. How about you who bought the Rottweiler when it was 3 weeks old and you said it got too big? Okay. I don't care who you are. You got to be a moron to say that you got a Rottweiler and you're getting rid of it because it got too big. You could know nothing about dogs, but you know a Rottweiler is a big dog. Okay. You could tell me all this BS crap excuses for why you people get rid of dogs. Okay. That's the problem. But here in America, we like to push the responsibility somewhere else. We like to push it on shelters, on dog trainers, on vets, on this and that. When we in America, we dog owners, we should start taking responsibility. Now, don't get me wrong. There are people who have legitimate life events, and I get that, and I empathize, and I feel bad for people who have to get rid of their animals or, you know, hey, stuff happens, I get it. But the majority of people who are getting rid of their animals, they don't deserve them. I'll shut up.
Bonnie?
I personally really don't have that much to say on this issue. When Jeff was talking about people in shelters and rescue going above and beyond and using their own finances and giving a lot, I thought of teachers in this country having to buy supplies for their students and not getting enough money for education. So I've just thought of the correlation there. But I think if shelters are a business and they're about making money and keeping people in their jobs, well, they need more dogs. And that's pretty much, and I don't think that's a good system. I don't think that, there's something about the whole system that bothers me, and I'm gonna just shut up at that.
Well, here, I'm going to add a little something. I can tell you that money isn't always the answer to it, because the Animal Rescue League of Boston, when I worked for them, they're a nonprofit organization, but they had over $100 million in assets.
Yep.
We were union kennel workers. We were making like $9.50 an hour in the 90s cleaning kennels. So it's not about the money, because their constraints were being in the middle of the city, the liabilities of taking some of these dogs out into the city and into the area and what that could cause. They didn't have a lot of area to get the dogs outside and to exercise them. We couldn't walk them on a leash. Mm-hmm. Certainly not the dogs that were in there for any kind of a holding period. You know, they were also the city pound. So, but the bottom line is they had all the money in the world and they still couldn't help the dogs be more enriched and more,
well, that Brian, that was really my point, that it seems, and I had an experience with Steve when I studied with him, that the solution isn't about just throwing dogs in shelters and having people have jobs and do all of that. There's got to be something more extensive than that can help fix the problem.
Yeah, I mean, just to jump on what Brian was saying, I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to education and education of the people and so forth in some of these shelters. I volunteered a couple of years back at North Hempstead Animal Shelter in Fort Washington, New York. And that's, you know, I have 513C, what have you. It's by the town of North Hempstead, and it's done mainly by volunteers. Obviously, they do have a staff there. But getting to what Brian was saying, not much funds going in there. The staff wasn't making squat. But most of that money they did get was going towards the enrichment of those dogs. So, for instance, they had a playground in the back where it was basically like an agility run, if you will, and the whole playground, they could do obstacle courses and get some exercise. And they also built a whole trail section in the back. And so there would be, like myself, I would walk the dogs with the dog handlers or the adoption advisors. So I would do both. And we would work with the public and to educate them in terms of neutering and spaying, as well as making sure that we're finding a suitable home for these people. It's not, you know, some of the, I shouldn't say all, but there are some of the private shelters where it's basically you go in, you're looking for a dog, what kind of dog you're looking for, and if they have that kind of dog, okay, here you go, see you later. And it wasn't any kind of education. It wasn't, where you're trying to match the right kind of family to the right kind of dog, or the right person to the right kind of dog, whether it be based on age and based on the family's lifestyle and so forth.
Well, that's a whole other debate is, denying people the access to a dog because they're not qualified. And then the debate of, well, you would rather put the dog down than give him a home. And, and then there's that whole, who decides.
True.
But Brian, is that another debate, or is that part of this debate? Is this helping or hurting the dog?
Well, that's a really tough question, because I personally, if we had a really good dog and had a potentially bad home going to, I would rather decline the dog going to the home. Does that mean I would rather put the dog to sleep? Well, no, absolutely not. But I think it's a little, a little vain to say that we can tell by just interviewing somebody face to face that they're going to be a good home or a bad home. So I think shelters have to do a lot of due diligence when they're going to place these dogs and make sure the homes that they're going into are vetted as decent and quality homes, because it's just as bad for a dog to go into a bad home and wallow there as it is to be in a shelter where people are actually caring for it.
No, I would agree with that. And that's the other thing too. You can only do so much because people can tell you what they want you to hear. And so you may not always get the whole answer, the truth.
Right, and the shelter's not going to have all the resources to send somebody to the person's home every time somebody wants to adopt a dog. So it's a very convoluted, tough business or undertaking.
But it is a business.
Yeah,
it's a multi-million-dollar business.
Well, the CEO of the nonprofit made over $100,000 a year as guy who sat up in his office and dictated what happened, and he never cleaned a kennel in his life. But that's where some of the money goes to, unfortunately.
And there was a shelter in LA that was taking adoption fees up to $1,000 for, I think it was for a Labradoodle, that people were up in arms about. So it is a business. Steve.
I'm doing something wrong then, because my rescue costs me money.
That means you're doing something right.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
That sounds good. I agree.
That's right.
Steve, what do you got to say?
Well, I'd like to go backwards a little bit. And
imagine
that. I kind of got this attitude, and I had an 18-month stint as a interim executive director of the SPCA here. But I'm in an affluent area, let's start with that. I mean, I always felt that when a person came in to surrender, why we weren't putting them on like the weekly fee right then. It's like, you want to give me your dog because you can't keep it. So it's going to cost you $30 a day until we find a home for the dog. Because they shouldn't be able to just surrender a dog, here you go. And it's over for them, and it just begins for us. There's something wrong with that. It costs money to feed the dog and care for the dog. And it can't be, what happens is, at least in my experience, is that we would have contracts with the local communities, some of them, and we would be then responsible for taking care of the strays, and we would get paid. That's how we got paid. We would get this money from the local municipal, places around, and we had our money. But it's never enough. And then you got to go do the fundraising, because it's just never enough. And even when you have a lot of money, it doesn't ever seem to be right. So how come if you can surrender without there being any responsibility? And then when I try to suggest that, they told me then these people are going to let their dogs loose in the street. They're not going to surrender them because they don't want to pay. And I'm like, well, maybe then we have to, you can't leave your car on the side of the road and take the plates off. We will find you, And so there's got to be a way to find these lunatics that will do that. I'm sorry to say that in public, but, people do these things. They let their dogs loose in the street to get killed. If you're going to be that kind of person, I feel like we have to, it's our job to somehow attach the owner to the dog. If you take the responsibility, it's either going to be a microchip, it's going to be something, so that if I find this dog in the street and I scan him and your number comes up, then that $30 a day is probably $60 now, because I'm going to bang you for letting the dog loose in the street. If I can't arrest you, then I'm going to get to your wallet. And if you try not to pay me, we're going to garnish your pay. You know, that kind of stuff. I mean, because I hate to disagree with Joyce, but I'm not a big spay-neuter guy. I think that up here where I live, you can't get a puppy. You cannot go to a shelter around here and get a puppy. There are no puppies. So we go down south and we get puppies. And we pay for them, by the way, when we go we go to rescue them, and we're paying money for those puppies. And here's my fear. I'm afraid that the lunatic, can I call him that? Yeah. It's not HBO or anything, but I worry that person who brings in those puppies that shouldn't have been born in the first place, I'm afraid that they get paid for those. I don't think that every shelter is so cool to say, oh yeah, bring me those puppies because I don't want you to drown them, and just bring me the puppies. I feel like maybe they're paying the person who's got one green tooth in their head for those puppies. And if they pay them, whatever they pay them, $50 a puppy, $20 a puppy, and then by the time they get up here, there's several $100s as an adoption fee. Yeah. And because I'm so like into the health thing with dogs, I find that sterilizing young puppies is not doing them any favors. And I feel like as a dog guy, I do not want to affect their long-term health because people are irresponsible. They're just irresponsible. I don't want to cut the dog because people are irresponsible. I want to go after these people. There's got to be a way to catch up with these people, because that's what's going to stop it. You go after these people and their money, they're going to stop this nonsense. Otherwise, it just goes on. And I feel that there is a money train somehow. That's not appropriate. You know, not like the Brian thing, you know, like Angel Memorial, Boston, you know, all that beautiful stuff. You know, some of it's really ugly. And then where Joyce is, there are those places that they're dungeons. They're not shelters. And then what about separating out? What is a shelter versus what is a sanctuary for the dogs that are truly not really adoptable? And if you have a sanctuary, how do you do good kennel enrichment for those dogs?
Well, there's a great example of that out in Utah, Best Friends Animal Society. Mm-hmm. They're a great place for older retired dogs that weren't placed anywhere. Now, obviously they can't take them all, but they have, you know, pockets as deep as can be.
Mm-hmm. But they're doing the right thing.
They're absolutely doing the right thing. I mean, I'm working with one of their cases that the regional director fostered, and she's here now being rehabbed with us. And they paid, you know, I gave them a discount, but they were ready to pay full price and more. You know, so they're doing everything they can to help as many dogs as they can, and they're utilizing their funds properly. Not all places are.
I love that. But you know, so it's of course a difficult and not easy to solve, but I think until we start taking the owners to task, that it's just going to fall out on the dogs one way or another. It breaks my heart to see a 9-week-old female puppy with stitches in her abdomen, you know, during her fear impact period, you know, we're doing surgery on the dog. It's like, it's so bad. It's so bad. You know, and we keep doing it to the dogs instead of doing it to the owners. And so, you know, I'm for all like going after them. You know, you got to board your dog, you're going to pay money. This is a long board, perhaps, a really long board, but you took the responsibility, you took the dog in, and now you're going to dump it. It's a dump. You got to pay. I think you got to pay. Mm.
That's my. You get the last word on this.
Me?
Yes, you.
Well, I think that, first of all, I think it's all been said pretty much, and I mostly agree with all that. We're human. There are good people, there are bad people. There are smart people, there are stupid people. We're inherently flawed. Therefore, anything we create, such as shelters, are going to be flawed. There are going to be good shelters, bad shelters. That's just the way it is. You can't have a perfect system because we are inherently flawed and it's our system. But my number one thought on this is, what's the alternative? If no shelter, then what? So I think we're stuck with this inherently flawed system because what else is there?
And that seems like a good place to leave this. And I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank everybody for watching. And to end it as I usually end it, to quote Steve, there's this topic, as usual, it's complicated. But I hope that everybody learned something and everybody found this interesting. I know I did. And thank you for watching again. And we'll see you in the next video. Bye now.
Bye.
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 Boom.